Order. Alice MacDonald to move the motion.
Thank you, Mr Twigg, and it is an honour to serve under your chairmanship. As we go about our daily lives, shopping, working, socialising, or simply enjoying a quiet evening in our own homes, nothing has the power to disturb our experiences like anti-social behaviour. It can make people's lives a living hell. I'm sure that my colleagues from across the East will have inboxes full of concerns raised by constituents about anti-social behaviour. It will differ in its form, whether it's in rural or urban areas, and I wanted to list just a few examples. Fly tipping, littering, loud music played at all hours, nuisance neighbours, uncontrolled animals, the menace of off-road bikes. Last year, nationally, the police recorded 1 million incidents of antisocial behaviour. In fact, estimates from the Crime Survey for England and Wales showed that 36% of people experienced or witnessed some type of antisocial behaviour in their local area. In Norfolk, my county, 8,800 incidents of ASB were recorded by the police between 2023 and 2024. The House of Commons Library reports that in my constituency, from March 2023 to 2024, 948 incidents of ASB were recorded. But I want to bring to life what that means for my constituents, because, as I said, it does take many different forms. Last year, our local paper, the Eastern Daily Press, reported antisocial behaviour in Norfolk's libraries had increased by almost 40%, with staff offered extra support to help deal with rising abuse from visitors. Last week, I held a meeting for residents on Britannia Road who have been plagued by antisocial behaviour and speeding in their areas for years. Despite the imposition of a public space protection order, this has had little effect. And I'm determined to work with local councillors, council and the police to finally get some resolution. Antisocial behaviour in car parks has meant public toilets being nearly permanently closed, as one of my constituents has told me. And just a few days ago, the City Council had to lock the gates of parks and cemeteries again overnight after antisocial behaviour and vandalism. Yes, I'll give way.
First of all, Mr Chairman, I commend the Honourable Lady for North North for bringing this forward. I spoke to her beforehand, and the very point that the Honourable Lady has referred to is one that concerns me as well. It's always saddening to hear of instances of antisocial behaviour across the UK, alarming instances of graffiti, for example, and destroying public spaces such as children's parks. And one incident was so shocking, inappropriate drawings on children's slides. So does the Honourable Lady agree with me that there must be a better community police presence to take substantive action to ensure that parents do not have to need to worry about potential damage to the park equipment and inappropriate graffiti that young ones may witness at a very, very early age?
Alice MacDonald.
I thank the Honourable Member for his intervention, and I totally agree, and I'll come on to the importance of a visible police presence later in my speech. As I said, the City Council has had to lock gates again of parks, and just today actually the Feed Cafe, which is a brilliant social enterprise in Waterloo Park in Norwich North, spoke out again because again they'd suffered vandalism, and the manager said that they feel targeted and intimidated. They've called for CCTV, and that's something that I'll be backing with the local council. Derelict sites have also become hotspots for antisocial behaviour. Very sadly, a few weeks ago, a huge blaze broke out at Dibden Road, which was an empty shoe factory. 17 fire crews had to attend from across the county. Thankfully, nobody was hurt, but too often derelict sites like this are not properly secured. And I will.
I'm very grateful for giving way. In my constituency, I get regular reports in of antisocial behaviour from Pleasure Fair Meadow car park, as well as on Stanham Way, about the screeching of tyres from motorbikes, loud music until the early hours of the morning, and constant instances of drugs and antisocial drinking. So does my honourable friend agree that we need to take this sort of antisocial behaviour seriously wherever it's happening, and that local residents shouldn't have to put up with this?
MacDonald.
I completely agree. I think sometimes antisocial behaviour are dismissed as trivial incidents, and we all know these are not trivial incidents. They cause real disturbance to many of our residents. I know also that my constituents are continually frustrated by antisocial and inconsiderate parking. I'm sure members here also have issues raised around this, whether it's obstructing pavements or blocking driveways. And indeed, research by the British Parking Association in the last few years has revealed that this is one of the biggest frustrations British people experience in their daily lives. But I do want to be clear, Norwich is a great place to live, and indeed we have seen communities rally round to support each other after antisocial behaviour. But a small minority can cause misery for many. So I welcome the measures the government set out yesterday in the Crime and Policing Bill. I particularly want to welcome the new powers for police to seize vehicles that cause havoc in our city centre, removing the prior need for a warning. E-bikes and e-scooters have recently been subject to a police crackdown in Norwich that saw 12 seized in just one day. The new respect orders will also give the police and local councils powers to ban persistent offenders from town centres or from drinking in public spots such as high streets and local parks. This, I think, will make a real difference in areas like the Prince of Wales Road in Norwich, home to a lot of vibrant nightlife, but businesses have often reported complaints about antisocial behaviour. So I hope the Minister can reassure us that for serious and persistent offenders who affect our constituents day after day, that these respect orders will indeed give authorities the powers they need. But of course, many of these measures will only be effective if we have police on the streets to enforce them. And I want to pay tribute to the police and police staff in Norwich, Norfolk and across the country who do really work hard. And that's why I welcome the government's commitment to recruit 13,000 extra neighbourhood police officers and PCOs with a named contactable officer in every community. I have met many of the local officers in our area through Safer Neighbourhoods teams meetings, and they do work incredibly hard, but often they are stretched in the areas that they can cover. I welcome that the government has increased police funding by 1.1 billion, a 4.1% increase in real terms, which includes funding to kickstart this recruitment. Norfolk Constabulary is set to receive 235 million in 2025, an increase of 12.8 million on the previous year. But can the Minister reassure me that this recruitment of 13,000 neighbourhood officers and the funding package provided will result in more police officers on Norfolk Street so our residents can see that reassuring presence? Under the Conservatives, neighbourhood policing was slashed in communities across the country, and I know Labour is determined to change that. However, there do remain real challenges. The chair of Norfolk's Police Federation has spoken out this year on the difficulties facing the police forces in our county, including police officers leaving or having to take time away from the workplace, given huge pressures upon them. So could the Minister also speak to the action we're taking to support the police at work and address retention issues? As the Minister... I'll give way.
I thank you for the honourable member for allowing me to speak and giving way. Similar to the honourable member's constituency in Norwich, in my constituency of South and East and Rochford, we share very much the same issues as well. We have a high street that needs to be reanimated. We have low levels of antisocial behaviour. But it's also, as my honourable member mentioned, a great community. And so I wholeheartedly sort of support what she's saying. What I would also encourage people to do is visit Southend, East and Rochford as well, because it's really important that communities are reanimated with people visiting and spending time within the community. So does my honourable friend agree that it is important that we create the conditions to our high streets, towns and city centres and enable them to thrive? And does she agree with supporting the government in its crackdown in reducing crime?
My honourable friend will be aware, I recently visited Southend and saw what a vibrant community it is. So these measures will indeed benefit, I believe, the east of England as a whole, but also the country. Just to conclude my point on police and police financing, as the Minister will be aware, the Chief Constable for Norfolk is also the National Policing Lead for Finance and has raised with me a number of issues, including some no-cost areas that could be explored to relieve pressure, such as the flexibility for them to recruit the right workforce mix. And I hope the Minister will speak to this and perhaps some of her conversations with the Chief Constable in her response. As I have said, Norwich is a wonderful place to live, and we can all play our part in ensuring our fine city stays that way. It is vital that the fight against antisocial behaviour is carried out at all levels, and I wanted to welcome the work of Sarah Taylor, our excellent Police and Crime Commissioner for Norfolk. I also want to welcome the work of Norwich City Council's excellent Love Norwich campaign, which aims to tackle environmental antisocial behaviour with a range of measures to tackle fly tipping, littering and graffiti. I will.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way on the point of councils. In my area, Central Bedfordshire Council has just decided to remove all of its safer neighbourhood officers. The Chief Constable has said that there will be increased risks to the public because of that. These are uniformed people who go around our streets handing out fixed penalty notices for littering, looking at graffiti and generally making the community feel safer. Both the Liberal Democrats and the Conservatives in the Council voted against an amendment to keep them in place. Would my honourable friend agree that councils really have got a duty to make sure that they crack down on this low-level antisocial behaviour, and that if they don't, there's a real knock-on effect for local people?
I totally agree, and as I said, this action needs to be taken at all levels, central government, local government, and indeed in communities who do brilliant work. As I was saying, the Love Norwich campaign also includes a grant scheme where communities can apply for up to £2,500 to enhance an open or communal space near them. This is the best of our society in action. I'm sure we've all seen in our areas litter picks led by local volunteers, seeing people coming together to keep our areas clean, safe and welcoming for all residents. I also wanted to welcome the investment of our Labour-led City Council into new security doors, including at St James Close in Norwich North, because many of my constituents have told me that unrestricted access can contribute to long-running antisocial behaviour issues. Of course, we would want to prevent those issues in the first place, but it is a good example of a local council responding to what they are hearing from local communities. Chair, I will conclude with this message. Antisocial behaviour is a blight on all our communities. It cannot and will not be tolerated. I applaud the government's actions in taking efforts in taking action to tackle it and to put more police on our streets, but there still is, of course, a long way to go. But I know that this government will continue to do everything it can to tackle the scourge of antisocial behaviour in all its forms.
Yeah.
The question is that this House considered antisocial behaviour in the east of England. Lewis Cocking.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship, and I congratulate the member for Norwich North for securing this important debate this afternoon. Some antisocial behaviour problems can be extremely localised down a single street, in a block of flats or between neighbours, ruining the lives of individuals targeted but sometimes going unnoticed by the wider community. In recent months, many constituents have written to me and contacted me for help for dealing with antisocial behaviour problems caused by their neighbours in housing association properties. Research found that those living in housing associations are up to 30% more likely to experience criminal or inconsiderate antisocial behaviour compared to those who own their own property. This sort of behaviour ruins lives, and when it is happening in the vicinity of your own home, there is often no escape. The situation is made even worse when the victim is vulnerable due to their age or a medical condition. And sadly, it is far too common for me to hear that housing associations responsible are failing to take this issue seriously. As I've said before in the House, it is clear that as well as the police, housing associations must play a full role in dealing with antisocial behaviour. While I welcome the government's rhetoric on tackling the scourge within our communities, it remains to be seen whether their new respect orders will be fully utilised by housing association providers who, from my experience, are not always interested in hearing about antisocial behaviour problems in the first place. Previously, in the House, I was told that existing civil injunctions will be renamed as housing injunctions, and these will deal with that low-level antisocial behaviour between neighbours. And the explanatory notes from the Crime and Policing Bill state that housing injunctions can be applied for in the same way as the previous civil injunctions. So how exactly will renaming something that already exists to help deal with this type of behaviour in our communities, when my constituency and constituents are telling me that the current system doesn't go far enough? And I look forward to the clarification from the Minister on that specific point when she does her summing up within this debate. What has been proven to cut antisocial behaviour is hotspot policing. And I'm pleased to see the fruits of this can be seen in my constituency of Broxbourne, thanks to the efforts of our fantastic Police and Crime Commissioner, Jonathan Ash-Edwards, and our hard-working local police officers. During January alone, Waltham Cross had more than 682 hours of additional police patrols were carried out, 8 arrests were made, and 2 weapons were seized. This increased visibility is reassuring to residents and prevent crime before it actually occurs. In some hotspot areas within Hertfordshire, antisocial behaviour has been reduced by up to 50%, which I absolutely welcome. Our constituents, whether they live in social housing or simply are using their local town centre, expect and deserve to feel safe. As the Minister knows, driving down antisocial behaviour is crucial to achieving this, and I'll be watching the government very closely to see if they follow through on their promise.
Josh Dean.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. Can I thank my honourable friend, the member for Norwich North, for securing this important debate on an issue that I know will be deeply important to our constituents. I want to start by recognising that Hertford and Stortford is a fantastic place to live, work and learn. My parents moved to Hertford in the late 1990s because they wanted the best start in life for me. And I grew up lucky enough to benefit from the diverse offering of opportunity in our semi-rural community. Our residents are deeply proud of our towns and villages. They want our local area to thrive, but too often instances of antisocial behaviour cause huge disruption to their lives and, as others have said, blight our communities. In the year ending March 24, there were just over 2,000 incidents of antisocial behaviour in Hertford and Stortford, and these are not simply statistics. Each one is a resident who feels less secure on their way home from work, in our town centres, or even in their own homes at night. I do want to take this opportunity to acknowledge the work being done by police in our community. I was pleased to see that tackling retail crime and antisocial behaviour in Sawbridgeworth was a priority for police, with extra patrols and public appeals to identify perpetrators. And likewise, I welcome the use of regular speed checks on Haddam Road in Bishop Stortford to tackle antisocial and dangerous driving, with one driver issued with a traffic offence report after he was caught speeding at 54 miles per hour in the 30-mile-per-hour zone. I will happily give way.
I thank the honourable member for giving way. Does he agree with me that when police do their patrols to catch people who speed, it actually gets on apps quicker to tell people coming down the road that there is a policeman standing there with a speed gun? Does he think the government should look at exploring whether it could ban apps from doing that so we can catch people that speed on our roads?
Trustee.
Thank you for raising that point. It's a very interesting point and certainly one that I will consider. I think it's very important that we're tackling these antisocial driving and speeding instances. We have a very specific incident on West Street in Hertford where residents have been campaigning to deal with antisocial speeding and driving, not just since I was a councillor there a year ago, for the last 25 years, which I'm sure members won't mind me pointing out is longer than I've been alive. We know that antisocial behaviour takes many forms, often going hand in hand with crime, and this means that our police have to fight on multiple fronts. They will always have my support when they take positive steps to tackle antisocial behaviour in our community. We know that there is more to do, and I welcome this Labour government's commitment to cracking down on the antisocial behaviour that blights our communities, including through the tough new measures in the Crime and Policing Bill. I know, for example, that residents regularly disturbed by e-scooters and off-road bikes misused on our streets will welcome the removal of the need for police to issue a warning before seizing vehicles associated with antisocial behaviour. Ours must also be a government that tackles antisocial behaviour at its roots, and I want to turn to antisocial behaviour amongst young people in the time that I have remaining. Too often in semi-rural communities like mine, young people are driven to antisocial behaviour because of a lack of provision and support. The famous image of the loitering youth only exists because there is so rarely anywhere else for them to go. Such was the decimation of youth services under the watch of the previous government over the last 14 years. I want to pay tribute to the work of the charities and voluntary organisations filling gaps in youth services in our community, particularly the Thirst Youth Cafe in Bishop Stortford and Future Hope in Hertford, where I once volunteered. Their work not only deters young people from antisocial behaviour and the more serious crime it acts as a doorway to, they also build their confidence so they can find the path that's right for them and contribute positively to our community. I warmly welcome the work this government is undertaking to introduce a network of Young Futures hubs to support the development of young people in communities like mine, improve their mental health and well-being, and stop them from being drawn into a life of crime and antisocial behaviour. And I'm also encouraged by plans to develop a new national youth strategy to deliver better coordinated youth services at a local, regional and national level and help all of our young people to reach their full potential. I'll happily give way.
Shannon.
I'm just listening to what the honourable gentleman has said in relation to the groups that are helping to give youth people and young people an opportunity to do something. Does he have in his constituency that I have in mind the churches who reach out very clearly to help as well? Salvation Army, as an example, in Newton Orange, a new centre being developed. Those are some of the outreach things that people are doing individually, voluntarily, and they will make a big difference as well. Does he agree?
Absolutely. And I point out that the groups that I've referenced today are supported by local churchgoers and religious groups in our community, and I absolutely pay tribute to them, not least because I was supported by youth services as a young person. I wouldn't be standing here as our Member of Parliament for Hertford and Stortford without them. I'm looking forward to engaging with young people in our community and local service providers over the coming months to ensure that they can contribute directly as the Department for Culture, Media and Sport develops the exciting new National Youth Strategy. And on that point, I'd be grateful if the Minister could outline in her response how the Home Office is working across government to ensure that tackling antisocial behaviour and crime prevention is wired into the National Youth Strategy. And I'd similarly be grateful if the Minister could set out how the Home Office will work with policing teams in semi-rural communities like mine to continue to crack down on antisocial behaviour. Thank you.
Give way.
I will give way.
Thank you.
At the very end.
Sorry. As a former youth worker, I'm very pleased to hear you talk about the benefits of youth services. Do you agree with me that we've seen an erosion of youth services across the East with cuts to council funding, and very often children and youth services are the first to go?
I couldn't agree with my honourable friend more. I'm often interested in the chamber of the party opposite speaking of their successes when young people like myself lived their failures, and too often it was youth services, arts and culture, the things that really support young people in our communities to find the path that's right for them that was first for the chopping block. I thank him for that intervention. On that point, I will conclude. Thank you.
Andrew Lewin.
Thank you, Mr. Swig, and I want to congratulate my honourable friend, Member for Norwich North, for securing such an important debate. My constituents have so much pride in our community. The marriage of town and country was the vision behind Welwyn Garden City, and Hatfield is a new town that blends hundreds of years of history through Hatfield House, but also a spirit of innovation as the home of the world's first jet airliner. But antisocial behaviour is so damaging because it chips away at that sense of pride in our communities. Instead of embracing public spaces, it forces people indoors. You don't look outwards. You lock the doors to try and feel safe at home. And like other honourable members, I hear too many stories of how antisocial behaviour is taking its toll on my constituents. I've heard examples of rocks being thrown at family homes, of public urination on street corners, of a banned breed of dog locked up on their street, rarely walked and behaving menacingly. And perhaps most powerful of all, a primary school student who, on a visit that was fantastic, recounted to me how they'd seen an off-road bike illegally racing through one of our parks and nearly knocking over a pensioner. They told me that it made them feel worried to go to the King George V playing fields in Welwyn Garden City, and they were just 10 years old. It's time for action, and this government gets it. Absolutely.
For giving way. Just on that point of off-road bikes, well, we have that problem. We also have the problem of e-scooters on pavements, and I receive regular complaints from my constituents about that, them being used improperly, often at great risk to sort of elderly people who perhaps can't move out of the way quickly enough if one's whizzing up behind them. So does my honourable friend agree that we need to take this sort of antisocial behaviour really seriously, and does he welcome, as I do, the measures in the crime and policing bill that will help police to seize these vehicles?
Andrew Lewin.
I absolutely do, and I would add that there are, he's absolutely right, as my honourable friend, to talk about older people who are vulnerable for e-scooters, but I think of young families, mums and dads with prams and babies as well, and I've heard some horror stories about their experiences, so I completely endorse what he said. And I was just going on to the action this government is taking. I was delighted to see the Crime and Policing Bill pass its second reading yesterday, and wanted to briefly highlight three measures, some of which have already been referenced, that can make a particular difference, I hope, to Welwyn Hatfield. First of all, giving the police the power to seize bikes or vehicles immediately, a really important change that there would no longer be need for a warning. If bikes are being, or e-scooters are being ridden irresponsibly, let's get them straight off the road. Secondly, respect orders, powers that will give the police and local councils the ability to ban persistent offenders from our town centres or from drinking in public spaces such as high streets and local parks. And crucially, that failure to comply with the respect order would be a criminal offence, and with police given the power to arrest people who are in breach of this straight away. Finally, and perhaps most importantly, the commitment from our manifesto now in government to recruiting 13,000 more neighbourhood police and community support officers across the country with a focus on targeting the most prolific offenders. Mr Chair, when in Hatfield is at its best, when the streets are bustling, people come together and feel both security and pride in the place they call home. This Labour government understands how much this matters to people and why tackling antisocial behaviour locally and nationally is rightly a priority.
Jan Craft.
It's an honour to serve under your chairship, and I'd like to congratulate the member for Norfolk North for bringing this important debate today. Antisocial behaviour and disorder is a blight on our high streets and town centres, and I hear all too often from my constituents in Thurrock about behaviour that is making their lives a misery, forcing them to avoid problem areas, and in the worst cases, too afraid to leave their homes. Through experiences shared with me, I see how crime perceived as low level leads to people worrying about themselves and their children and feeling unsafe in their community. And these problems can all too often feel intractable. At a street meeting I recently held in West Thurrock, residents told me that their peaceful lives have been made consistently miserable by the menace of dirt bikes. One resident told me that the noise is unbearable, sometimes continuing for hours at a time. Those who work from home have their working hours consistently interrupted by the noise of dirt bikes.
Another point my honourable friend give way. I thank my honourable friend for giving way. There's many things about this bill that I welcome, and I particularly welcome the action that we're going to take on dirt bikes. May I also say that I hope for the future that we also look at other types of vehicles, particularly those vehicles, cars with modified exhaust, because one of the problems I often hear from residents, and I've come across many times myself, is boy racers at all hours of the day, seemingly acting with impunity because the police and local councils often don't have the resources to act upon those vehicles.
Jan Craft.
I thank my honourable friend for his interruption, and he's quite right that powers introduced in the crime and policing bill will go some way to alleviating some of these problems. And indeed, he does bring a very good point about the noise in itself causing such an issue. And it's exacerbating, I think, the fear that people have of this kind of antisocial behaviour that makes some areas almost a no-go zone. And that can't be right. Another resident also told me that when these bikes are out and about, she's worried for her child's safety. The distance between her house and the local park proving something that she approaches with fear, as she knows that they are driving in an illegal and a reckless manner, and she worries that her child could eventually be hit by one of these drivers, having had a number of close shaves in the past. I've held a number of coffee afternoons where I bring residents together to discuss the issue of antisocial behaviour and crime in their neighbourhood. And the problems are consistent, and I think one that all members in this room will know and be aware of. Things like graffiti, disorderly behaviour, dirt bikes again, things like fly tipping as well. And I know there are measures in the crime and policing bill to give councils powers to tackle this further. These are all things that add to the overall impression of an area as being run down, as being undesirable. And our area, along with places across the country, deserve better than that. I'd reflect the words of the honourable member who spoke about the area having much to offer and so much civic pride. And Thurrock is an area that also has an awful lot to offer. But we find that too often communities are afraid to come together in that spirit because of the behaviour that they see on their own doorstep. One of the things that consistently comes up time and again is the broken link between communities and their local neighbourhood community policing force. The refrain, I think, that again will be familiar to most of us in this room, you just don't see a police officer anymore. And there is a real push. I think the government's switch to pushing to community policing is the right move. It allows police officers to get to know the area, to get to know the pinch points, to get to know the issues that residents have, and it offers that visible reassurance to people who are too afraid to leave their homes that there are police available and they are on your side. And quite often I find residents say, I haven't got the time to sit and call 111 or to file a report that goes into great detail about what I saw and when. But if I saw a police officer on the street, I will go up to them and I'll say, I've seen this behaviour at this time, at this place, and it builds this intelligence-led policing narrative that can only be for the best. And that's why I welcome the government's move to neighbourhood to community policing. This is the kind of preventative work that stops problems becoming larger, that allows people to feel safe on their streets, that ultimately allows for the kind of society that we all want to see and that we all want to live in. And I would just like to conclude by asking the Minister what plans the government has to encourage police forces to make sure that when they are in an era of competing priorities, and of course serious crimes must be given priority and must be looked at, but to ensure that local police forces do prioritise community policing, do prioritise the importance of people having a visible police presence on their street and having a police officer who they know the name of, a named police officer for their area, and how can we encourage police forces to follow through with this?
Terry Jeremy.
Thank you very much, Mr. Tweed. It's a honour to see you in the chair today, and I congratulate my honourable friend and Norfolk colleague for securing this important debate. It must be said that statistically Norfolk is one of the safest counties in the whole country, but antisocial behaviour is still very much a concern county-wide, including in my own South West Norfolk constituency. And I am reminded on a regular basis that statistics offer little comfort for those experiencing antisocial behaviour. Nationally, according to the Crime Survey for England and Wales, a record 24% of people believe that antisocial behaviour is very or fairly bad. And I don't think it's unreasonable for people to expect to feel safe in their own community and in their own home. But what we saw over the past 14 years of Conservative government, instead of delivering law and order, they did the exact opposite. They hollowed out neighbourhood policing and gutted and broke the criminal justice system so that only over 90% of crimes now go unsolved. Of course.
Thank the honourable member for giving way. And I'd just like to remind him the last Conservative government recruited 20,000 police officers from across the country, and the only force not to meet that target was the Metropolitan Police under Labour Mayor Sadiq Khan.
I thank the honourable member for his contribution. If you look at Norfolk specifically, at the end of the last 14 years, there were fewer serving police officers than at the start, and that's a point that we've made repeatedly. 240 police community support officers were scrapped entirely and not replaced on a like-for-like basis. The then Conservative Police and Crime Commissioner cut all police community support officers, making it the first force in the country to do so. As a former youth worker in the constituency and a long-term councillor, I saw the immediate impact of that decision. PCSOs were able to make connections with the community, meeting councillors and resident associations, collecting and sharing information where possible. In Thetford, the largest town in my constituency, there was a PCSO based in the main high school, building a rapport with young people that paid dividends later on. Labour's mission in government is to restore trust in our justice system as a key pillar of our society, and that mission has begun, and I'm delighted that just yesterday the Home Secretary highlighted the pledge for 13,000 more neighbourhood police and community support officers, alongside an extra £200 million of funding in the next financial year. I am very proud as a Labour MP in a rural constituency, so I'm particularly pleased that this government is looking to deliver a new rural crime strategy, because we need a fresh approach to tackling crime in rural areas, and we must recognise that crime and antisocial behaviour in rural areas is different. Crimes such as hair coursing and livestock worrying are some of the major issues in my constituency and of great concern to residents. I also want to pay tribute to USDOR and their Freedom from Fear campaign, which seeks to prevent violence, threats and abuse against workers from antisocial behaviour and threatening behaviour from the public. I've spoken to staff in village shops across South West Norfolk who often work alone and in very remote areas, and the abuse of retail workers is a huge concern to them. This government understands the need for further protections, and I'm delighted to see that the Home Secretary just yesterday at the second reading of the Crime and Policing Bill announced specific offence of assaulting a retail worker. I'd be grateful if the Minister could comment on the opportunities and programme for delivery for rural communities in the East. Thank you.
David Taylor.
Thank you, Mr. Twiggan. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship, and I would also like to thank the Honourable Member for Norwich North in securing this important debate. I want to start by doing a quick stock take of where we are with both my constituency and the region. I am immensely proud of my community, as I know everyone in this room is immensely proud of their own communities, and I do not want to be accused of in any way doing down my town, but it is undoubtedly true that we have some important challenges with antisocial behaviour. In January 2024, we were the worst major town in Hertfordshire for antisocial behaviour, with more than 200 reported incidents. The town centre, which should be and is a great place to meet friends and loved ones and to do some shopping, is now one of the most dangerous in the county. Dacorum has the highest number of vulnerable children at risk from exploitation from drug dealers and county lines in the county. Indeed, we do have a bit of a long-standing issue with drugs. Indeed, I don't talk about this often for very obvious reasons, but even members of my own family have in the past been affected by drug addiction issues due to scumbag drug dealers peddling horrible drugs. Now, the overall crime rate in 2023 was 95 crimes per 1,000 people in Hertfordshire, in Hemel Hempstead. Damningly, between 2014 and 2024, the crime rate doubled. Now, I'm proud of my community, but we cannot allow the thugs to win. Now, people often ask why we're in this mess, and it is impossible to ignore the indisputable fact that in the time that the Conservatives were in power, 14 years nationally and longer locally, local crime has skyrocketed. They ignored antisocial behaviour, cut our police force by 20,000 officers nationally, and took 60p out of every pound from local authorities. Objectively, this is why we are where we are. It is their mess, and people in my patch are the ones having to deal with it. But there is light at the end of the tunnel, and I was delighted to speak last night in the second reading of the government's crime and policing bill, which I voted in favour of. It is at its heart of our government's Safer Streets mission. I want to briefly touch on some aspects of the bill that will help combat antisocial behaviour in my patch and in the region. Firstly, Part 1, Clause 1, which will provide the police, local authorities and other agencies with a new power to tackle antisocial behaviour, respect orders. And like a stuck record, I'm once again going to suggest that Hemel Hempstead be considered for the pilot of one of those respect orders, which I do believe would make an incredible difference to a hard-working police force locally. And Clause 4 is another one that I would like to highlight, which makes life tougher for criminals and thugs, increasing the upper limit for fixed penalty notices from £100 to £500. We must make sure that victims are prioritised and criminals face the full force of the law. There must be enough of a sting that they think twice before behaving in this manner. Now, Part 3 of the bill will address retail crime, as others have mentioned in this debate, and as I mentioned in the Chamber yesterday. I won't repeat what I said in the Chamber yesterday, except to bring forth the need to ensure that we are not letting people just wander into our shops and steal what they want with impunity. Clause 14 will introduce a new crime for assaulting retail workers, and I thank the Honourable Member for South West Norfolk for highlighting this point, and I agree with him, and I also want to put on record my thanks to both Osdor and the Cooperative Party for the hard work that they have been doing campaigning on these issues for many years. We saw during COVID that retail workers are not just hard-working, outstanding members of our community, but essential to our very survival, and I welcome that the Labour government will reflect this in law. Labour is taking seriously the plight of antisocial behaviour, but so too have our police. I've spoken before about how I've been out with Bobbies on the Beat and the local issues on a ride-along scheme, and I very much recommend to any member of this House who hasn't taken part in that scheme to do so. Indeed, individual citizens can do so as well, often in many police forces, and it really is an eye-opening window into the tough challenges that our police face. They are truly heroes in our community, and thanks to the local police in Hertfordshire, despite the resource pressures that they have been over, we have seen some progress in tackling the plight of antisocial behaviour. I thank them again for their service, and I want to highlight the Operation Clearhold build they are doing in an area of my town, Grove Hill, an Operation Hotspot in the town centre, which have brought significant uplifts in patrols and prevention in both areas. I would also like to convey thanks for the engagement that the Minister has offered, and I was lucky enough to have the opportunity to meet with her recently to discuss some of the specific issues in my constituency, including issues of antisocial behaviour hotspots such as Hoskin Court, Livingston Walk, Swallowfields and others in our town. For too long, people in Hemel Hempstead have been let down. This Labour government is showing leadership, and I look forward to continuing to do all I can as well locally to ensure that the national changes that we make are felt in my town. Thank you.
Charters.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's a real pleasure to serve under your chairship. And may I thank my honourable friend for Norwich North on securing today's debate. And I rise really to share parallel case studies to those I'm hearing with so many of those we've heard from the honourable members from Thurrock, Hemel Hempstead, Welling Hatfield and Norwich North and others. To start my remarks, let me take you all the way back to my time at secondary school in the wonderful community of Haxby. But unfortunately, Mr Twigg, that community has declined thanks to the threat and disdain we've seen relating to ASD. What did that look like? We've seen smashed down doors of retail shops. We've seen fires in parks, setting fire to the crucial resources for the wonderful people in these towns and villages. But let me give some more recent and striking examples, and I'll take you back to the general election, if I may, Mr Twigg, and sorry to any Conservative members present for taking us back to the general election. It was a lovely day in beautiful Bishopthorpe. I'd been walking up the street and I called into a local shop, but I saw two people running out of the front door, each holding baskets full of instant coffee. These, of course, were stolen, totally unacceptable, and they were harassing people through the village as they left. And I reported this to the staff, but the staff had said, despondently, that this had all become too much of a regular occurrence, that abuse and shoplifting went hand in hand. Shoplifting and its abuse became commonplace under the Conservatives. They seemed to stop caring about low-level crime, and as a result, antisocial behaviour in our constituencies spiked. If someone steals a couple of £100 a few times a week, that isn't a low-level crime for a small business. That could be a question of survival. But it also has ramifications for our wider communities too. And stories travel in closely knit communities like the ones we represent. Mr Twigg, let me share a few other examples of how antisocial behaviour has deeply affected my constituents in York Outer. One constituent wrote to me about his neighbour's garden, which, by the way, is seen as a source of pride for that community, cared for and tended to for years. However, a group of youths in the area ransacked his garden, undoing all of that hard work, and then they refused to even apologise. Shameful. I couldn't imagine how frightening this was for him, and let alone how disheartening it was after his neighbour had spent so many years making this garden look so lovely. This government's all about restoring pride in our communities and pride in each other. But I don't always blame everything the last government did, because it's more complicated than that. For generations, our young people have not had the opportunities. Opportunities have been taken away. They felt disenchanted. But under this government, opportunities for young people will change, and that is the way we'll tackle the root cause of antisocial behaviour. And may I move on to another case, Mr Twigg. A constituent told me how his wife was left terrified after her car was followed and she had abuse shouted at her. It's critical we stop things like this from happening as part of this government's mission to halve violence against women and girls. But the most heartbreaking thing for me was hearing her suggest that these types of incidents had actually become normalised in the community and there was no clear end in sight. This must stop. And finally, just a final example of antisocial behaviour, and this one was in Strensall. A father shared with me how his son's beloved bike was stolen from him whilst the child was defenceless. And this one's personal. As a young dad myself, I would be devastated to see my son upset at the hands of such cruel behaviour in my community. His son's now left without a bike, but more than that, he's lost his confidence, and that's unforgivable. And the stories we've heard today There are stories that are just too many, and they're all unacceptable. And that's why I'm pleased that the government's crime and policing bill sailed through second reading yesterday, as we start to get a grip on the common occurrences that I've mentioned. I want to pay a special tribute to the Minister, who's been extremely supportive of tackling antisocial behaviour in my own community of Haxby. In fact, she was so supportive that just yesterday I received a response to her, for which I'm grateful. Now, she's a fantastic Yorkshire colleague, and in the spirit of directness that people from our region so often employ, I wonder if I could make a small suggestion to her. In the community I represent, we find that some of those causing trouble are actually 15, 16 and 17 years old, and the respect orders as part of the crime and policing bill are a huge stride forward in tackling antisocial behaviour, but respect orders don't apply to 15, 16, 17-year-olds. I wonder if there is a place for something like a junior respect order, or some sort of other pilot, or some sort of other tailored measure to root out antisocial behaviour at that particular age bracket. I'd just like to end by giving a brief shout-out to the neighbourhood policing teams in York Outer, in particular to Sergeant Henderson, who I've worked with closely, and I know firsthand just how committed he and his team is to serving our local community. Like me, he's someone who is determined to end what is an epidemic of antisocial behaviour once and for all. And may I once again congratulate my honourable friend for Norwich North on securing today's debate, and I hope all of us here today can leave an agreement that now is the time to tackle antisocial behaviour once and for all.
I call the Lib Democrat spokesperson, Mary Goldman.
Thank you, Mr Twigg. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. I'd like to congratulate the honourable member for Norwich North for bringing this really important debate today. And while I am the Liberal Democrat spokesperson for this debate, I also would like to declare a strong interest in that I am the Member of Parliament for Chelmsford, which is in Essex, which, for those of you who might not quite know the geography, is firmly in the east of England. I'd like to start by saying a few things about my constituency, and other honourable members have spoken with pride about their constituencies and how important it is to them that antisocial behaviour is curbed. And I'd like to start by saying that Chelmsford is a lovely constituency. Of course, I'm slightly biased, but it is a wonderful urban constituency, and there's lots of wonderful things going on in it. But of course, when I'm out knocking on doors, as I'm sure other honourable members are as well, I come across residents who tell me about things that just aren't going quite so well. And they worry about, instances of drug dealing, which several residents told me about as I was out knocking on doors on Saturday in the centre of Chelmsford. They tell me about fly tipping, and I know that fly tipping is an issue that was raised, for example, by the honourable member for Thurrock. They tell me about noisy car meets that happen sometimes around the constituency, and somebody who used to live by Chelmsford's, one of Chelmsford's main junctions, the Army and Navy, I know that was something that used to keep me awake at night sometimes, and I know how frustrating that can be. And there are other things that lead to antisocial behaviour, structural issues, things like broken streetlights, which make people feel that they are not safe when they walk around the constituency, and these are things that we need local councils to be able to be much better at tackling. And constituents are understandably tolerant but a little bit fed up of antisocial behaviour, and we certainly need to do more to tackle it. I know, for example, sometimes it's very low-level antisocial behaviour, whether that's riding on pavements is a particularly annoying thing that happens in my constituency, bikes riding on pavements. I'm sure it happens across the country, but also things where new trees have been planted and somebody's come along and chopped them in half overnight, which I think is, really, nobody's going to be very ill off the back of it, but they are understandably frustrated by it. I know I mentioned just now the issue of fly tipping, and somebody else also mentioned the fabulous volunteers that we have in our constituencies that help to make them a better place. The volunteers I'd like to single out in Chelmsford are the Chelmsford litter wombles, who spend much of their free time going out and clearing up the results of the antisocial behaviour in the forms of litter. And I've joined them on various occasions to help them clear up. But the truth is that everyone deserves to feel safe when they walk around their neighbourhoods, and many honourable members have raised this important point. but many honourable members in this debate today, and I would say it's well over half of them, have focused their contributions on the importance of policing and on punishment and on tackling crime. And while I agree that that is a very important aspect, it's a shame that we didn't have more members, I think, and some did raise it, of course, but I think it's a shame that we don't focus more of our attention on what's driving these issues in the first place. And it was really heartwarming, therefore, to hear the honourable member for Hertford and Stortford, who I think in this debate first raised substantially the issue of young people having a lack of provision and support, and the importance of youth services. And youth services have been slashed by the previous government, and they've left gaps. And it's not just youth services, you know, as we think of them being provided by councils. It's also funding towards other charities, other organisations that can help with that. It's schools, those extracurricular activities. Schools simply don't have the budgets for those sports activities, for music, for drama, for all the things that help to develop young people and give them an alternative to getting into trouble, I would say. And then, of course, that sets them up for life. And so I'd really like to see, and I know my party, the Liberal Democrats, would very much like to see more focus on early intervention, on giving young people something to do. One of the honourable members spoke about knife crime, and I know that this is really a debate about antisocial behaviour, but I think knife crime does fit into that, unfortunately. And the Liberal Democrats would like to see a public health approach to the epidemic of youth violence, which identifies and treats risk factors rather than just focusing on the symptoms. We think that investing in youth services in general is genuinely engaging. It reaches more people, and we must give young people the support and opportunities that they deserve to help our communities feel safer, and to help people to feel safer too. The bottom line is talk is cheap, and it's action that really, really matters. And it does matter. Because we need to really understand what the driving forces are for some of this antisocial behaviour. And it's not just about the lack of provision of youth services, but we need to see why the type of people that we're seeing in our prisons are there in the first place. Because when we're talking about tackling crime, we obviously talk about the ultimate end to that is people ending up in prison. And the endless cycle of crime and punishment, with more crime leading simply to more calls for police and tougher sentences, just isn't working. And some studies suggest that 50% of the prison population may have dyslexia or other neurodivergent conditions. Well, when that is happening, we are getting something very, very, very wrong. So we really do need to be focusing on what is driving antisocial behaviour in the first place. And also unnecessarily criminalising young people only makes it more likely for them to commit crimes in the future. We know that high-quality youth work gets results. It's been proven time and again to help vulnerable young people escape the clutches of gangs. But we saw, as I've said, that the previous Conservative government slashed youth services. Unfortunately, that was robbing young people of hope and contributing to the rise of serious violence. I'd like to thank again the honourable member for Norwich North for bringing this important debate, and especially focusing it on the east of England. Thank you very much.
I call the Shadow Minister, Dr Kieran Mullen.
Thank you, Mr Twigg, and it's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. And the Shadow Policing Minister is busy on the Bill Committee, so it's my pleasure to respond on his behalf today. And I'd like to begin by thanking the member for Norwich North for securing this debate. And like the Lib Dem spokesperson, I'm sure the Government Minister in the end, of course, I experience these issues in my own constituency as a constituency MP. Just this morning I was on a call with the local police to talk about a recent spate of antisocial behaviour in Bexhill. Again, a fantastic place to live, work and raise a family, but still experiencing these issues. And members present will be aware that the East of England is not easily described in simple terms. Like my own region, its towns, cities and countryside create a diverse landscape, making policing challenging. The urban-rural divide leads to very varied patterns of crime and offending and different demands on resources. Crime rates in the East of England are lower than the national average, and crimes excluding fraud have seen the rate per 1,000 people fall by 12.5% compared to pre-pandemic levels. Additionally, the antisocial behaviour crime rate was 4.6% lower in the East of England than last year. However, this is not enough. We must always be more ambitious in tackling crime our constituents deserve to live their lives free from the burden of antisocial behaviour. It's fortunate that in certain regions we have effective police and crime commissioners working hard to address this very issue we're discussing today. I understand that antisocial behaviour accounts for 14.5% of all crime recorded in the region, second only to violent crime at 36.5%. It's essential that the government works with local forces to implement effective strategies to reduce antisocial behaviour, recognising the damage it causes, undermining trust in our communities. Government has said that tackling antisocial behaviour is the policing priority, and I know that people across the country will welcome measures to curb this behaviour, which does so much harm. Research conducted under the last government highlighted its impact, with one Home Office study revealing that 66% of people changed their behaviour in at least one way due to antisocial behaviour. I hope the Minister will acknowledge that governments of both parties have sought to reduce antisocial behaviour over many decades, and we've discussed today over the lifetime of some of the members present, and we haven't yet been able to completely crack it. To this end, the last government produced an antisocial behaviour action plan and took steps to implement a zero-tolerance approach by banning nitrous oxide, increasing fines for fly tipping, littering and graffiti, and delivering hundreds of thousands of hours of uniformed patrols targeting hotspot areas blighted by antisocial behaviour. And given my experience of 4 years as a volunteer policeman, the immediate justice element of the programme was one that I felt had particular potential. Data from pilot forces, including Essex, showed that over 100,000 additional hours of ASB-focused patrols were conducted in pilot areas. This led to a significant increase in enforcement activity, including nearly 800 arrests, close to 2,000 stop and searches, and nearly 1,000 uses of antisocial behaviour tools and powers. I will.
The Shadow Minister for giving way. And I'm an Essex MP, and I am very interested in his comments on enforcement measures over the last few decades, as it is my understanding that issuing of public notices for offences such as drunk and disorderly and that kind of low-level behaviour actually fell to 0 in 2023, as opposed to when they were consistently being issued in 2010. And I wondered if you had any thoughts on that.
With the data in the members' constituency in relation to those notices, of course, there's always a challenge of distinguishing between a focusing in police patterns of crime. We talked today, for example, about shoplifting. What we've seen at the same time is a decrease in burglaries and car thefts, etc. So the police always have to be nimble and not allow themselves to become overly distracted about one particular element of crime. But I take the member's point seriously. And I'll also go on to talk about in Essex. More recently in Essex, the Police and Crime Commissioner outlined the benefits of an additional £1.6 million investment in hotspot patrols to tackle antisocial behaviour in 15 areas. Known as Operation Dial, the first phase of the initiative resulted in 101 arrests and the issuance of 112 fixed penalty notices, in keeping what the member had mentioned, across 13 zones. It's welcome that Essex has not been alone in this practice, with police forces in Cambridgeshire and Norfolk also utilising targeted, visible patrols which can have the dual effect of addressing both antisocial behaviour and serious violence. I will.
I thank him for giving way. Specifically in relation to Essex, is he aware that the Conservative Police Fire and Crime Commissioner recently proposed getting rid of all 99 PCSOs in Essex? And I wonder if he thinks that would ever be the right thing to do.
You'll have to forgive me, as I explained, I'm not the policing minister, so whilst I've heard of that, I don't know the local circumstances in detail. I'm sure she's made representations to the Police and Crime Commissioner on behalf of her constituents, was absolutely the appropriate thing to do if she doesn't agree with that course of action. As I was talking about, those patrols are particularly valuable when we consider analysis conducted by the Youth Endowment Fund. Their research, based on meta-analysis, found that hotspot policing has the potential to reduce overall offending by 17%. This includes reductions in violent crime by 40%, property crime by 16%, disorder offences by 20% and drug offences by 30%. And what did Labour come in and do? They scrapped the wider rollout of the immediate justice approach, despite evidence of its clear benefits. Were they ready to go with their own ideas with 14 years of opposition to come up with them? No, we faced a lull when the programme we were successfully delivering could have been going further, and we now have to wait for further pilots and a further wider rollout of their different approach. And behind the headline figures on police funding, the details reveal a very different picture. The funding settlement for the police announced by the Home Secretary and the Policing Minister a few weeks ago increased funding by £1.089 billion, and they made a big play of the figure at the time. However, when we go through the funding pressures that police forces across England and Wales face and add them all up, including the £230 million extra that police forces will have to pay on national insurance, the funding pressures add up to £1.205 billion. The funding pressures in the coming financial year, which starts in just a few weeks' time, are about £160 million more than the funding increase. Whilst the National Police Chiefs Council Lead for Finance, as the member who secured this debate mentioned, her local police constable, warning that this will inevitably lead to cuts across forces. That 43 police forces across England and Wales may have to cut up to 1,800 officers to make up that funding shortfall. We delivered the highest ever number of police officers on the country's streets, 149,679 police officers, and we saw a 51% reduction in overall crime, excluding fraud. So we should all be concerned about what may happen next. I'd also like to pick up on the points made about youth services, and again refer to my experience as a volunteer police officer. We should always be very cautious about supporting a narrative that excuses criminality. In my experience, the vast majority of young people from all different backgrounds with access to exactly the same services, higher or lower than we might want them to be, don't commit crime, and we should never say that a lack of a youth club is an excuse for young people to turn to crime. What we actually know is parental background, parental responsibility, families have an incredibly important role to play. And when we support that narrative, we talk down the very many successful parents who are doing a good job of keeping their kids on the straight and narrow, regardless of what services are available to them locally. I will.
I thank the Shadow Minister for giving way, and I do reflect about the majority of young people that do not commit crime or antisocial behaviour, and obviously there is parenting choices in there which are to be applauded. However, there is considerable data about, for example, the prison population and their co-occurrence of SEND and undiagnosed disabilities. And will he agree with me that there are some people who are at a disadvantage and are predisposed to go into this kind of behaviour, and it benefits all of us to actually tackle the root causes of this behaviour rather than just to look at its effects?
I think the point I'm making is we have to be clear about the narrative that we are all supporting, and I didn't hear a single member opposite talk about the important role of parents and raise the point I've made. I'm happy to acknowledge that there are risk factors, but I'm always clear when I talk about these issues about the balance, and I didn't hear any of that balance from any of the members opposite. So to go on to what the Minister might say, I'm confident that when she responds, she'll highlight the new crime and policing bill, which was discussed, as we've heard, at length last night. One of the provisions the government has emphasised is respect orders. However, questions remain about their impact and the extent to which they will produce different outcomes in reducing antisocial behaviour. The government stated that the rehabilitative aspects of these orders will make them more effective than the previous regime, and they'll include more robust powers when enforced. With that in mind, can the Minister clarify what resources will be allocated to support the rehabilitative elements? I note that the government recognises that the success of respect orders is not guaranteed, which is why a pilot scheme has been introduced to assess them. It would be useful if the Minister could outline not only where these pilots will be implemented, but also how their success will be measured. The member for Broxbourne, always a doughty champion for his constituents, talked about the importance of housing associations, which is something I have also experienced as a constituency MP. Can the Minister confirm what engagement she's had with housing associations in relation to their use? And additionally, has the Minister had discussions with colleagues across government to ensure that the approach to antisocial behaviour is coordinated across all departments? We've repeatedly heard from police forces, as I've said, including those in East of England, about the strain on their budgets. In Norfolk, the local force has expressed concerns about their £4 million funding shortfall, which has been met with an inadequate level of supplementary funding. Additionally, in Essex, we have heard about the challenges of the funding of the PCSOs that the member has mentioned, the very group of people that we expect to be able to work in this area. So to finish, I would ask that the Minister gives us a very clear set of measures and targets for how they expect to do so much better according to their delivery of this programme. I will.
Thank you, Member, for giving way. I think we had quite a lot of consensus in this debate. I did want to ask him, when the last government left office, were police numbers going up or down? Because I believe in June 2024 they're actually lower than March 2024, and I've had quite a lot of criticism about Bill. Can you tell us how he would pay for any extra police officers or for the police officers? Because I'm not hearing many solutions.
Sure. I can point to a number of things that we wouldn't have done. We wouldn't have invested the level of money in settling public sector strikes at above inflation pay rises. We wouldn't have asked train drivers to have I think it was a £7,000 pay rise. So there are many different ways we would have spent the money. And absolutely, police numbers ebb and flow. But you've talked about a narrative of what we achieved in government. And we did achieve the highest ever number of police officers. And with fewer officers potentially approaching, we inevitably create greater risk, making it easier for the perpetrators of antisocial behaviour to avoid detection and confrontation. If the government is serious about reducing antisocial behaviour, it must ensure that its choices do not result in further cuts to police numbers. If they don't do, their pilots and plans will not make the difference our approaches were making, and all of our residents will be let down as a result.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr Twigg, and it is a pleasure to serve with you in the chair this afternoon. And I welcome the Shadow Minister, and I am very interested to hear of his role as a volunteer police officer. So may I begin by thanking my honourable friend for securing this debate. I'm very grateful to her and all the members who have spoken this afternoon. I think it's right to say that I think everybody who spoke very passionately about their own area, their own constituency, but they also made reference to the antisocial behaviour that's blighting their areas and that needs to be dealt with. I'm also very pleased because I'm also a member of the group of MPs who represent the East of England. So I'm very, very pleased that as the Minister I'm answering and I have direct knowledge and experience as an East of England MP. Now, my honourable friend made a number of important points in her excellent speech on antisocial behaviour. And like my honourable friend, I want to start by paying tribute to the police and the work that they already do around antisocial behaviour in the East of England and, of course, all around the country. And I will come to some of the issues around neighbourhood policing and the government's approach to that in a moment. But first of all, I do want to say this focus on the East of England today has raised a number of specific local and regional aspects to the debate. And we've been very fortunate to have a geographical spread of the East of England. The Honourable Member for Broxbourne spoke particularly about the role of social landlords and tackling antisocial behaviour. My Honourable friend, the Member for Hertford and Stortford, referred to the Young Futures programme and the need to engage with young people and talked about, I think it was the first youth cafe, which he said was a very good example of the work that goes on with young people. And I'm very pleased to confirm that, of course, yes, we have a cross-departmental approach to working with the agenda around young people, because we know as part of our Safer Streets mission, it's cross-government, it's not just for the Home Office or DCMS. My honourable friend for Welwyn Hatfield talked about some of the problems that older people, pensioners or young children face, and the menace of antisocial behaviour from vehicles. And that, again, was also talked about by my honourable friend for Thurrock, who talked about dirt bikes and the noise and the fear and the no-go zones. And she specifically asked about police forces and the need for neighbourhood policing and making sure that police forces do actually act on what this government is asking them to do. And I'm going to talk about that in a moment. My honourable friend for South West Norfolk talked about the issue of not having any PCSOs in Norfolk, and that was a decision of a previous Conservative PCC. So I think it is interesting to note that, because I think in almost every other part of the country we know how important PCSOs are, and that they do provide that really important community-based policing. And also the issue about rural crime. And of course, this government is working with the MPCC on a rural crime strategy, recognising the particular issues that rural areas have. My honourable friend for Hemel Hempstead referred to county lines and vulnerable children, and prompted and also said actually that the ride along with the police to see for himself how the work they're doing is so vital and important in communities. And I want to say something about drugs in a moment. And my honourable friend for York Outer again asked about respect orders and the fact that they are only going to apply to over 18-year-olds. what I would say to him is that we want to make sure that young people who are getting themselves into bother, into engaging antisocial behaviour, that we deal with them through our prevention partnerships. We identify them that they need support and encouragement to do more positive things than engaging in antisocial behaviour. But of course, there are measures that can be brought in if they fail to engage. I would just say to the Liberal Democrat spokesperson, the Honourable Member for Chelmsford, I do think memories in this place can get very clouded. You know, the Liberal Democrats were part of the government between 2010 and 2015, the years of austerity, where councils saw massive cuts to their budgets, which then resulted in cuts to youth services. So I welcome that the Liberal Democrats are now talking about the need to invest in youth services, but we do have to remember that when they were in government, they were part of those decisions to slash public services. And also the Shadow Minister, again, I think a slight case of amnesia about what's actually happened over the past 14 years, the massive cuts to policing, over 20,000 police officers, the experienced officers that were lost, many police staff lost over the 14-year period as well. Now, I recognise at the end of that time, of course, there was a mad scramble to actually deal with the fact that they realised cutting police officers had big consequences for all of our communities. I will give way, yes.
I think memories are definitely being scrambled. The current government has talked a lot about the £20 billion, supposed £20 billion deficit in day-to-day expenditure. I remind the Minister that it was around £100 billion when we came in 2010. So as the government talks about difficult decisions they had to take, we had 4 times as many difficult decisions to take as they have.
Well, I think it's actually 22 billion in terms of the black hole that the previous government left this government to clear up. And also, I think the thing I'm very conscious of as a minister now in post 9 months is the whole area of prevention was slashed under previous Conservative governments, and we're now reaping the consequences of that. And one of my honourable friends referred to the prison population and the fact that the preventative measures were not available, and now we see what that actually means. I am going to move on to the specifics of my honourable friend's contribution. She mentioned a number of ways in which antisocial behaviour manifests itself at the local level in her constituency of Norwich North, including fly tipping, littering, loud music, nuisance neighbours. She talked about derelict sites being set on fire. She talked about issues around car parking and toilets being vandalised and parking generally being used in an antisocial way. And I absolutely share her concerns on all these examples, which are yet more evidence of the damage and distress caused by antisocial behaviour and the need to tackle it as a priority. ASB is especially damaging when it occurs around people's homes and the places they visit daily in their communities. And it's not merely a nuisance, it has devastating consequences, corroding people's freedom, damaging their mental health, and ultimately undermining their sense of hope. Of hope and home, actually. My honourable friend asked about the government's commitment to recruit the 13,000 neighbourhood officers and whether the funding package provided will result in more police officers on Norfolk streets. This government has committed to restore that neighbourhood policing, and that includes putting thousands more uniformed officers on the beat in neighbourhoods up and down the country, including, of course, in the east of England, visible and in all our communities, rural and urban. We have made £200 million available to forces in England and Wales for the financial year coming in April to support the first steps of delivering that 13,000 neighbourhood personnel. Every part of England and Wales needs to benefit from this pledge. Our approach to delivery in 25-26, which will be year 1 of a 4-year programme, is designed to deliver an initial increase in the neighbourhood policing workforce in a manner that is flexible and can be adapted to the local context and varied crime demands. This means the precise workforce mix will be a locally made decision, including, of course, in Norfolk. This major investment supports the commitment to make the country's streets safer and reflects the scale of the challenge that many forces face and the government's determination to address them. And like my honourable friend, I would also like to pay tribute to the PCC in Norfolk, Sarah Taylor, and also the Labour Council for the work that they're doing. And of course, it is crucial that police and partner agencies listen to the experiences of their communities and of victims. And as I know, yes, very happy to.
I thank the Minister for giving way. And I note that she speaks about the excellent work of the Police and Crime Commissioner in her area and in Norfolk. However, our Police, Fire and Crime Commissioner took the controversial decision to slash all 98 PCSOs, a decision he rode back on after outcry from myself amongst my other Labour colleagues and opposition members opposite. How does she kind of see where we are in areas where Police, Fire and Crime Commissioners perhaps do not share our goal for neighbourhood and community policing? How does she see us working with them to encourage them that this is the kind of way that policing needs to go?
My honourable friend raises a really interesting point, and on the specifics of that example, we were very clear when the provisional police settlement was announced before Christmas. We wanted to listen to what policing had to say about the figures, and one of the issues that was raised was about that neighbourhood policing. That's why we put in 100 million in the provisional settlement, which then we decided to go up to 200 million in the final settlement, and that assisted PCCs like the one that we're referring to at the moment to be able to then say, well, actually, the proposals that were being put forward in December could change. So we're very much a government that wants to listen to policing and work with policing. And I think it's fair to say that PCCs of all complexions are very clear that the neighbourhood policing, that community policing, is something that the government is going to drive forward. And I think almost all of them want to work with us on that. I was just going on to say that it's important as well that the antisocial behaviour case review is an issue that needs to get a bit more attention, because this is a tool which can support victims of persistent ASB as a safety net to ensure that action is taken by giving those victims the ability to demand a formal case review in order to determine whether there's further action which can be taken. Now, I know that the Victims Commissioner has talked a lot about that and wanting to make sure that everyone is aware they can ask for that review if they don't feel they're getting their help from the statutory agencies. Now, my honourable friend mentioned antisocial driving and speeding, and this is something that I and many other honourable members spoke about extensively in a Westminster Hall debate last week. In the Crime and Policing Bill, which obviously was debated yesterday in the main chamber, we set out there that the powers within that bill will give the police greater powers to immediately seize vehicles which are being used in an antisocial manner without having to first give a warning. Removing this requirement to give a warning will make the Section 59 of the Police Reform Act powers easier to apply, allowing police to put an immediate stop to offending and send a message to antisocial drivers that their behaviour will not be tolerated. Now, I was particularly saddened to hear my honourable friend's examples of antisocial behaviour in libraries and that staff were needing extra support to deal with this. No one should face this kind of abuse in their workplace, especially a place set up to help the public. She also spoke about the public resources being spent on repairing vandalised property and fire crews attending arson. This is precisely why we are determined to intervene early to prevent young people in particular being drawn into antisocial behaviour and crime, and to put tough measures in place to stop persistent adult perpetrators of ASB. Sadly, the sort of incidents that my honourable friend spoke about, and many other honourable members, are happening in lots of areas of the country. So I just want to touch now on the national context. And as we've heard, antisocial behaviour does take many forms, whether it's the off-road bikes, nuisance neighbours, or unruly gangs roaming the streets, creating intimidation and fear, or any other manifestation of this menace. It causes distress and misery in all of our communities. And the impact on the decent, law-abiding people is undeniable. They are left feeling isolated and frightened at home, in their neighbourhood or in their town centre. The enjoyment, as we've heard, of parks and other public spaces is affected. And I've said this before when discussing this issue, but fundamentally this comes down to respect. Respect for our laws, for fellow citizens and for our expectations as a society. None of us can accept a situation in which the actions of a selfish few blight the lives of others. And it's happening too often in too many places, and it needs to stop. The truth is that the response to antisocial behaviour up until now has been weak and ineffective for too many years, and this government is determined to put this right. As part of our plan for change, we are delivering a wide-ranging Safer Streets mission, and tackling antisocial behaviour is a central part of that mission, with a particular emphasis on improving the police response alongside tougher powers to tackle perpetrators. We are committed to restoring and strengthening, as I've said, neighbourhood policing and taking steps to tackle antisocial behaviour. Now, neighbourhood police officers... Yes, I'm happy to... Yeah.
I don't know, this is coming up in the Minister's speech, but as I asked during my speech, will she set a target for the reduction in antisocial behaviour that they're going to achieve in their time in office?
Well, I have to say, I think the Shadow Minister, obviously he's not the Shadow Policing Minister, but yes, I'm sure you're doing your best. What I would say to him, though, after 14 years in the Home Office, I'm quite clear that the previous Conservative governments removed targets, removed the accountability structures that the Home Office should have set in place, and we are very much going to have a performance framework within the Home Office so we can hold police forces to account, something that under his government was dismantled. So, if I just carry on... and this adds to it, actually. Over the last decade, we've seen that decline in neighbourhood policing to such an extent that many of the bonds of trust and respect between the police and local communities have been damaged. Neighbourhood policing sits at the heart of the British policing model. It is a critical building block in helping communities feel safe, and the public rightly expect their neighbourhood police to be visible, proactive and accessible. So through our neighbourhood policing guarantee, we will restore those patrols to town centres and ensure every community has that named neighbourhood officer to turn to. And those working on the ground are best placed to understand what is driving behaviour, antisocial behaviour in their area and the impact that it's having there, and to determine the most appropriate response. And that goes to the point that the Honourable Member raised about housing associations and their ability to use the law to tackle antisocial behaviour in housing. The powers in the Antisocial Behaviour, Crime and Policing Act 2014, I believe, do not go far enough. For the government's part, we will ensure that police, local authorities, housing providers and other agencies have the powers that they need to respond to antisocial behaviour. So we will put that right, and we've discussed this already, by introducing respect orders. And under these measures, persistent adult perpetrators of antisocial behaviour will face tough restrictions, such as bans on entering the area that they have been behaving in an antisocial way, such as town centres or other public places. Anyone found breaching a respect order could face being arrested and could end up behind bars. We will pilot these measures initially to ensure they are as effective as possible before rolling them out across England and Wales. And this will be supported by a dedicated lead officer in every force working with communities to develop a local antisocial behaviour action plan. Practitioners and antisocial behaviour organisations have also asked for additional changes to enhance the current powers in the Antisocial Behaviour, Crime and Policing Act 2014 and improve the tools local agencies have at their disposal in tackling antisocial behaviour. These changes include extending the maximum time limit for dispersal directions from 48 to 72 hours, increasing the upper limit for a fixed penalty notice for breaches of community protection notices and public spaces protection orders from £100 to £500, and extending the power to issue a closure notice to registered social housing providers, amongst others. We will also introduce a duty for key relevant agencies, including local authorities and housing providers, to report ASB data to the government. Following commencement of the Crime and Policing Bill, regulations will be laid to specify which data the relevant agencies should provide and the form and regularity of submission. Changing this will give the government a clearer picture of local ASB and how the ASB powers are being used by local agencies, which will inform future local and national activity. This measure will close a key evidence gap to ensure a strong and comprehensive national picture of ASB incidents and interventions. These changes are long overdue. I also just want to make some other comments. First of all, about the Young Futures programme. And my honourable friend for Hertford and Salford raised this. And I think we are very clear that no single agency holds all the levers to tackle antisocial behaviour, and we have to work in a multi-agency way to reduce ASB and make communities safer. And we are committed to intervening earlier to stop young people being drawn into crime. And an essential part of this will be the Young Futures programme, I'm just going to finish this, which will establish a network of Young Futures hubs and Young Futures prevention partnerships across England and Wales to intervene earlier to ensure vulnerable children and young people are offered support in a more systematic way, as well as creating more opportunities for young people in their communities through the provision of open access, for example, to mental health and career support.
I thank the Minister for giving way, and she mentions a multi-agency approach, and I suppose where the public get frustrated with us is where we have meetings about an issue and another meeting about the issue. What assurances can she give us that with these multi-agencies approaches that action will be taken on the ground to solve some of this antisocial behaviour that's going on within our communities?
Well, what I'm very focused on is delivery, and of course we want partner agencies all to be sitting around the table, but we want them to deliver, and that's why we're, for example, putting that additional funding into neighbourhood policing to ensure that there is a presence locally. We're bringing in respect orders. We've got these new measures so we can see what's actually working and where there may be problems that we need to address in a different way. I want to just mention shop theft because a number of honourable members mentioned that too. And we know that has a huge impact on town centres where many small independent businesses trade, and it's at record high levels and continues to increase at an unacceptable level. And in the last 2 years before the general election, shop theft went up by 60%. More and more offenders are using violence and abuse against shop workers, and it's damaging businesses and hurting communities. And it's vital that people feel safe in their local shops and in their local areas. Now, the police have given a commitment in the Resale Crime Action Plan to prioritise attendance where violence has been used towards shop staff, where an offender has been detained by store security, and where evidence needs to be secured by police personnel. Although retailers have indicated early positive outcomes, there is much more to do. So we will, as set out in the Crime and Policing Bill, we're going to end the effective immunity introduced by the previous government, granted to low-level shop theft of goods of and under £200, to remove the perception that these people committing low-value shop theft will escape punishment. And we're also introducing the new offence of assaulting a retail worker to protect the hard-working and dedicated staff that work in stores. Everybody has a right to feel safe at work. The new offence will carry a maximum prison sentence of 6 months and/or an unlimited fine. However, reflecting the need to take a tough stance with meaningful criminal justice consequences, it will also come with a presumption for a court to apply a criminal behaviour order. This will prohibit the offender from doing anything described in the order, which might include a condition preventing specific acts which cause harassment, alarm or distress, or preventing an offender from visiting specific premises. I also just wanted to make mention of drugs, and tackling illegal drugs is key to delivering the government's mission to make our streets safer, halve knife crime, crack down on antisocial behaviour and go after the gangs who are luring young people into violence and crime. And the issue of county lines was raised, and I just wanted to say to the honourable member for Hemel Hempstead who raised that there have been some really excellent work around trying to smash those lines, and that is work that this government will carry on and is committed to. I think since July 2024, over 400 county lines have been closed and there have been hundreds of arrests, so that's very positive. In conclusion, I would just like to again thank my honourable friend for securing this debate today. I'm really grateful to her and all who have contributed. Antisocial behaviour plagues the lives of all those that it affects. It's a serious threat, and under this government it will be dealt with as such in the east of England and everywhere else.
Alice MacDonald to wind up.
Thank you, Chair. I want to thank all the honourable members for their contributions today and also the Minister for her very full response. I think for me there are three key messages really that stay. Prevention is key and we do have to tackle underlying causes, but we do need to have strong powers in place that empower local communities to do it. And the third message really is that we are all very proud of our communities and we want to work with them to make sure that they are even better than they already are. Thank you very much.
The question is that this House has considered the antisocial behaviour in the east of England. And many of that opinion say aye. The contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Order, order.